I appreciate everybody coming out on such a rough night. It is kind of rough out there. You don't know where the ice is, so I really appreciate everybody coming out. And I hope everybody enjoyed their Martin Luther King holiday. Unless you had to go to the back of the post office, then you don't like it. Just to let everyone know, and seeing that the TV's here, I wanted to say that we're open the second and fourth Sundays of each month, 1 to 4 in the afternoon. So I'll get that out there. We just had insulation put into the upper end of our building, all around the walls and the ceiling. Hopefully we're going to save some money on heating that way. We'll find out. We'll have to monitor it a little bit and see how much it saves us, but it was very open up above the ceiling. And I was surprised. You look at our ceiling, it's a white fiberboard, but up above it is tongue and groove. The old tongue and groove ceiling. I was really impressed. We had to cut a hole in it to get up there with the machine to pump it in there. So this is what it looks like up above the white. So I was impressed. I never knew that. I'm learning something. I've been here since we came here, and I didn't know what was up there. So that front part, for anybody that doesn't know, was built in 1882. So was a freight station on High Street in the same time period, and also where Lastic was. That building went up in 1882. So there was quite a bit of building going on at that time. Now, of course, they added this back end, but the front is from 1882. Just little information. Our next meeting, I can tell you now that we're going to have a talk on Transfiguration, the church that burnt down. We're going to have somebody come speak about the church. So that'll be our next meeting in March. So I think that's all I'm going to say, because we're running late already. So I'm going to introduce our speaker. I think everyone's pretty much knows Mike by now. He's been around for a long time. He knows everything there is about Pottstown. That's what I'm always told I do, but I always say, no, I don't. I might know a lot, but I don't know everything. But without further, I'm going to introduce Mike Snyder, and he's going to talk about Camp Pottsgrove.
Thank you, David. Before I go any further, is there anyone has difficulty hearing me? Anything? Good, okay. So we're going to talk about Camp Pottsgrove, which is a time when almost the entire Continental Army wound up out in Frederick, New Hanover, and what is now Upper Pottsgrove, or Lower Pottsgrove Township. And that's not until September of 1777. And by then the war had been going on, the shooting part had been going on since April of 1775. The British got off to a bad start. The colonialists had them barricaded into Boston. They couldn't get out, so they just got on ships and left. Came back in 76, captured New York, chased George Washington out of New York, clear across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. And at that point it looked like the revolution's over, because the army was melting away to nothing. And then Washington came up with this great idea, which we all know about, came over across the Delaware, attacked Trenton on the 26th, and then turned around about 8 days later, came back across the river and fought the British at Princeton. 2 big battles, which they won, and they spent the winter then in New Jersey. So we're getting back now, we're into 1777. The question is, how are the British going to take the war from here? They've got a big army in New York City and North Jersey. They also have another army, which they call the North Army, and that's going to come down from Canada. And the plan there is for them to come down through Canada, come down through New York, all the way to Albany, and maybe another army will come up this way, and we'll just cut the country in half. We'll isolate all those troublesome New York colonies or New England colonies that were giving everybody so much trouble. Okay, that's the plan. Unfortunately for the British, it didn't work that way, because the man who's in charge here is General, I think he might be, I don't know if he's been knighted by now, it could be General Sir William Howe, and his brother Richard Howe, Admiral Richard Howe, or Lord, he's a lord, is in charge of the Navy. So the Howe brothers are running the show. And so Howe's looking around, and he comes up with the idea of, I would like to capture Philadelphia. Now, I don't know if that was exactly what he wanted to do. I think what he really had in mind was, if he goes and takes a big army down to try and capture Philadelphia, it will force George Washington to fight a battle with him in which he looks to wipe out the Continental Army. Not just beat them, but destroy them, which would knock out the main prop of the rebellion. So that's where I think that's what he wants to do. I don't think it's so much that he thought, boy, I have to have Philadelphia because it's so important. But it was a way to get Washington to come out and fight him. He has a strange way of going about it. Now, if you're in New York City and you want to walk to Philadelphia, which I don't recommend, but it's kind of like only about 70 or 80 miles, you know. He doesn't want to do that. He's afraid about being able to supply his army as he marches across New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. So you've got the British Navy there. You've got hundreds of ships. So you load everybody on the ships. You wind up with about 15,000 people, counting all the soldiers, counting all the horses. And keep in mind that in those days, they traveled with what they called camp followers, women and children. So it was quite, and they in July, they sail down the Atlantic and disappear over the horizon, and they don't know where they're going. They have no idea. They thought, okay, well, we can go, if I want to take Philadelphia, how about the Delaware Bay? And then I can come up the Schuylkill River and attack them from there. Well, that didn't work out because the colonists had the Schuylkill very well blockaded. They had forts there, they had all kinds of traps, everything. So after pausing there for a day or two, he goes even further. Now imagine this, he wants to get to Philadelphia. What does he do? He goes all the way down to the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and sails back up the Chesapeake Bay to Maryland, where he gets everybody off the ship. It took him weeks. The guys are sick, the horses can hardly walk, so on and so forth, but he's ready to go. So at this point, he's going to march through, take his army through Maryland into Delaware, and then he's going to come out and he's going to march on Philadelphia from the west. George Washington will seek to stop him, but they're going to fight the battle along Brandywine Creek, September 11th, 1777. If not the largest battle ever fought in the war, it will certainly be the second largest. We lose. When I say we, unless there's any loyalists in here, I'm talking about the Americans. The American side loses, but fortunately, by the time the battle ends, it's getting dark, and Howe does not pursue us. We kind of get away and we go back towards Chester. And George Washington still is thinking about Philadelphia. So this is going to set off a period of intense marching and maneuvering that's going to take this army of his through Philadelphia, through Chester County, present-day Montgomery County, present-day Delaware County, and even into Berks County, in an effort to keep the British from getting across the Schuylkill River and getting into Philadelphia. If Howe's coming at Philadelphia from the west, he has to cross the river. No bridges on the Schuylkill River in 1777. If you're going to cross the river, you've got to wait it at fords. It's tough to get there. So Washington has that going for him. So basically what's going to happen here is they're going to fight a battle on September the 16th, or start a battle, let me put it that way. And it's called the Battle of the Clouds. It's down in northern Chester County. And the reason they call it the Battle of the Clouds is it rained so hard that they had to call it off. sorry, battle called on account of rain. And it was, we have the testimony of one Hessian officer, and they're making an attack against the colonialists, and he said the mud was so thick that we sunk into it up to our calves. So they couldn't maneuver. And it's a good thing for Washington and his army that they couldn't, because the American army, their ammunition boxes were very cheesy, and it rained so hard it destroyed all their ammunition. 400,000 rounds of musket gone. Artillery ammunition gone. He has no ammunition. Fortunately, he got away. He went over to Yellow Springs, and from there they're going to have to march all the way out to Reading Furnace in Chester County, or is that in Berks County? I guess it's still Chester. You go out to Chester, wherever it is, they're going out there to Reading Furnace, and there they spend the day of the 17th and the 18th getting their ammunition going, and so on and so forth. So in the meantime, so now we're going to get into an intense period of maneuvering. George Washington now is all the way, this is the 19th of September, and he's clear out in the boondocks of Chester County. He's got to get his army. Remember, he doesn't want the British to come into Philadelphia, so he has to march his army all the way across the Schuylkill River, and then go south on the Schuylkill to take up a blocking position. So these poor men are going to be doing some walking. Let me try to get, you have that map in front of you there. This is from Tom McGuire's book. And there it says Washington, September 19th. All right. He's moving, you can see him. He's going towards Parker's Ford. They're going to cross and eventually come down here to the lower fords on the Schuylkill River. This is Mad Anthony Wayne. General Anthony Wayne with his Pennsylvania brigades is going to be in the rear of the British Army, which is down here. And they're going to get massacred on the night of September 20th. Remember the Paoli massacre? That's what that's all about. But this is how they're trying to move into position. Going down here, Thompson's Tavern, which is not quite into Norristown. They burned that down, but there's still something down there. Okay, let me see the next map. Let's see once. Yeah, go on by that one. There we go. Okay, so what happens is that, as I talked about this before, Washington has a plan. He's got General Howe and his entire army now, and they've marched. They were in camp in Tredyffrin Township. If you're wondering exactly where, remember the old Valley Forge Music Fair? Roughly that area. So on the 20th, they're going to come over the hill there, and they're going to bring the whole army down into Valley Forge. And they're going to occupy, as you can see on the map there, from all the way down around Fatlands Ford, which is down around Valley Forge, all the way up past modern-day Phoenixville. It's going to be about 7 or 8 miles, and they're going to go in position there. Now remember that rainstorm we had on the 16th. They called it an equinoctial gale. And it rained so hard, so fast, that the Schuylkill became absolutely impassable. So that's one of the things that has, to this point, kept Howe from fording the river and walking into Philadelphia. And it gives Washington enough time to come down and go in there like that. So there they're going to be sitting. This is the British Army we're looking at here. And if you look on the other side of the map, you're seeing like Perkiomen Creek, Pauline's Ferry. The Federals would have been all along that line. They would have occupying a line somewhere around 9 miles. And he probably had at this point somewhere around 9,000 men. He does not have Anthony Wayne's division with him. He doesn't have Maxwell's division, and he's missing some of the militia. Okay, let's move on to that next map, see what we got. All right, that was it? Oh, no, go. Next map, keep going, I'm sorry. Oh, there we go, I like that. Okay, we got that. Washington marches from Reading Furnace to the Schuylkill River. On September 19th through the 20th, the Continental Army is going to march 30 miles. And they're going to have to cross the river at Parker Ford. Now, I think everybody knows where Parker Ford is now. You can cross the river there and on the nice bridge, and so on and so forth. No bridge in 1777. And the road of 724 or 23 that goes through 724 did not exist. That's a 1920s creation. So the road they had then is kind of what roads were in those days. It just kind of meanders around, a dirt road, really, really difficult to travel. But if you're interested, what you can do is when you come up to that intersection, you can take a left like you're going to go across the river to Linfield, but Old Schuylkill Road is there on your right, take that. It's like going backwards in a time machine. I've driven that road and I see people nodding their heads. They must have been there too. It seems like almost every house there is either 19th or 18th century. That's that. And I think what saved it from being developed was the fact that they took the road away from it. So there's been able to, it's just wonderful to watch. Let's go on here, see what I have next. There we go. So what you're looking at here, we're going to look at Washington's march on the 19th and 20th just a little bit to give you an idea of what they had to do. They would have gone out what we know as Route 23 today. And they would have got to a point, I believe, where modern Bethel Day Church Road is. They would have come down off the ridge and they're heading for Parker's Place, where they know there's a ford on the river. And what is a ford? It's not a man-made created thing, it's a natural created thing where you've got maybe good solid river bottom and it's not very deep, so that you can get across without being washed downstream. And remember, the river is still high because of all the flooding. And Parker has a tavern down there, and there it is. It's still there. Now this is not an up-to-date picture. I believe since I've taken this photo, there's a group working to try and get this. All right, I'm seeing it. Somebody shack their hands back there. Okay, this is old, but that's Parker's Place, and so everybody's going to down there. George Washington down to the lowest private in any of the regiments. All of these 9,000 guys are going to go across the river. And of course, they don't take the bridge, but they're going to go right down to Parker's house where the ford is. So they get to the ford, and they've got to do this. Now, this is in September, and it's cold. And the water temperature is probably somewhere maybe in the 50s. And they've got to wade this river, and it's very, very treacherous. An officer from a Delaware regiment noted that what he did was he had his men, they say like a group of 4 or 5, and they would link arms. And we waded across, keeping our muskets and our knapsacks over our heads, and we stayed dry that way. Some guys went to the point where they took everything off, at least from the waist on down, because once you get across the river, you still have to do a lot of marching. So anyway, they make it across the river. George Washington was on horseback. He swam his horse across, and they come out and they're moving on. Now, as they move on, if you take the modern road going into Linfield, if you look down to your left before you really get into Linfield, and the railroad things kind of obscure this is what you'll see down there. This house was built by Mordecai Evans. The house was built, I don't know, like 1720 or something like that. It's still there. The people that lived in there for years and years and years had done their best to absolutely preserve this the way it was. So that's the exterior. Can you do the next one? There's the interior. Look at that fireplace. That's an old Welsh-style fireplace. And actually, if Grandma gets cold, you can put a chair in there. I mean, you're not going to roast Grandma, but it's nice and warm there, and she can sit in there and warm up. And so George Washington was there. George Washington was in that house. We know he was there because he wrote a letter to John Hancock, the president of the Congress down in Philly, and said, we're now crossing the Schuylkill River, and we're going to move on. So that's what they do. They keep moving on, and we're going to move on. Okay. There's a big intersection there right before you get on to 422, and you'll see a sign that says Linfield Trap Road. That road was there in 1777. So they break off on the Linfield Trap Road, and they're going to head to the south and east. Years ago, I don't know, maybe 20, maybe 30 years ago now, I can't keep track of them anymore. The story goes there was a sailor family that had a farm down there. And, so, and it may be true and it may be not. Some of this stuff gets made up. But anyway, the man who's running the farm is having a conversation with George Washington, and there was this big white oak tree on the right-hand side of the road. And that's where they had the conversation. That tree was still there till maybe 25 years ago when PennDOT thought it was got to take it down because it's blocking traffic. Right? So courtesy of PennDOT, we've lost this great big oak tree. So see where they're going to come out. They're going to come out just to the west of Trapp. And from there, they're going to march, no Collegeville, but they'll march down to the Perkiomen Creek. They've got to cross the Perkiomen and so on and so forth. They're not going to go all the way that day. But at this point, we're very, very fortunate because we pick up an eyewitness to these events. Let's see what I have next. And there he is. Henry Melchior of Muhlenberg. Muhlenberg came over here. There have been Pennsylvania, what we call Pennsylvania Dutch, whatever you want to call them. I'm one. I think most of us, if we're not 100%, we've got a lot of it. If you're sitting here in southeastern PA. They started to come into Pennsylvania courtesy of William Penn. William Penn wanted to have this place settled, and he wasn't worried about what your religion was. He was going to make it fine for everybody. Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, you weren't allowed to be a Quaker. They hung Quakers up there. There's nothing like this here. Penn has agents going through the central part of Europe there. There was no Germany at the time. There was just a lot of little provinces like Württemberg and this place and the other place. And it had been a long period of war. Armies had been visiting these villages, burning them out, so on and so forth. The agents were recruiting people to come to Pennsylvania, and these people started doing it. They would get on the Rhine, find their way to the Rhine River, come down the Rhine to Rotterdam or Amsterdam and then to England, hop on a boat and show up in Philly somewhere between August and October of that following year. And they're just pouring into the place. And most of them that come are Protestant, primarily Lutheran or Reformed, which is now UCC. We had Mennonites, we had Amish, we had Moravians, the whole bunch, but that's it. And they were very concerned about their churches and their religion. And one of the things that they lacked, and we're talking about the earliest part of the 18th century now, and we're talking about wilderness, is they're trying to form congregations without legitimate ordained ministers. And they're getting some characters coming in there. So here comes Muhlenberg, and he was talked into coming over to Pennsylvania and taking charge of a couple of congregations. And that's what he does. And what Muhlenberg did, and this is a little bit off topic, but Muhlenberg was an inveterate journalist. He kept journals of all his travels and everything that happened to him from the time he came to the United States until he died. They've been published. They were published in the 1950s, I think, by the Pennsylvania German Society. The public library, Pottstown, has all 3 volumes. You can access them online, and they're just fascinating reading. And so we have his journals. At this point, let's go to the next slide. This is where he's living, and you probably pass this house all the time. That is his house in Trapp. He had just moved into that house in 1776, 1 year before this all started. So you have a front seat. The entire Continental Army is going by your door. And he writes about it, and his writings are very informative. They're very interesting. And one of the things he talks about is that the weather is cold. And he really feels sorry for these men because they're wet up to here, and they're marching along this muddy road, and they're cold, they're wet, and they're hungry and thirsty. They don't have anything. And all that night, as they're going through there on the 19th, people are pounding on his door. They're soldiers. They want in. You have anything for us? You know, that sort of thing. It's very bad business. So they're going to camp. They're going to get all the way down to around the Perkiomen Creek, and they'll get up the next morning and move on down. So they'll be taking up those fords. If you remember what I'm talking about, you know, in terms of where are these fords, Fatlands Ford is almost directly across from Valley Forge Park. Some of the other ones coming up, they'll come up as far as like almost to Phoenixville. And that's where he's going to array his army on the 20th. Hal has got his army, and they're coming over the mountains, and they're coming down here. So here it is. We've got a standoff. The river is still high. So you've got Hal here on this bank. Over here is Washington. And so what are we going to do? Well, Washington becomes convinced that Hal is trying to trick him. Let's move on to the next slide, though. I want to show you. That's his church. That's the Augustus Lutheran Church, built in 1742. It's the oldest Lutheran church in continuous use in the United States. It's not the oldest Lutheran congregation. That's out at Swamp. That's the Lutheran church out of New Hanover. But this is the oldest building, 1742, and it's still standing. Okay, keep going. Okay. So here's what happens. George Washington is looking at this situation, and he doesn't know what to do. He's not quite what to do about it. In the meantime, Hal's army is going to spread out. They're going to start to move upstream. And Washington probably misinterprets what he's seeing here. He thinks that they're trying to trick him because Hal has tricked him many times. He's outflanked him on many different fields. So George Washington is concerned about two things. Number one is that they'll move upstream far enough to get beyond the right flank of his regiment. Like say Tom Troutman over there, he's the right flank of the Union Army, or the Army. And so I'm British, and I'm going to go up further than this, and I'm going to come across the river, and then come down and attack you. So you'll have me pinned between the river and what else? That's one thing he's worried about. But another thing he's very concerned about is what's about 30 miles upstream? Reading. What's Reading got to do with all this? Reading at this point for the colonial effort is very, very important. It's a huge depot for supplies of all kinds. You can't afford to lose Reading. So George is looking at William Howe and his army, and he's thinking, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? You know, so what he does is I think he must weigh his possibilities here. So in order to avoid being outflanked or losing Reading, he's going to pull his army back from those fords that Howe's army is waiting. Howe doesn't want to cross there if he doesn't have to. He's trying to figure out how to get across without, losing a lot of guys. George helps him out. George says, okay, guys, and he pulls back, and they're going to get on the road, and they're going to start marching away. They're going to move up, well, it's what we call the Ridge Pike now, but it was the Great Road then. It was the main road from Philadelphia up to Reading. So Washington thinks that he's going to be outflanked by Howe, and because of that, he moves away. He moves away from it. One more. Oh, go back, I'm sorry. We need one more here. No, go back. That way, yes. Keep going. One more. I keep saying one more. Who knows where this is going to end? That's it, right there. Right there. There's a monument. Now they've moved it, but it used to be, there was a triangle of land. If you're down coming out of Phoenixville, you know where you've got PA 23 and then Bridge Street coming up like this. And there was a little triangle there. And I think about 1911 or so, they put this monument up. And what it says is, well, you can read as well as I can, this is the furthest inland point reached by the British invasion of the northern colonies during the Revolutionary War, September 21 to 23, erected by the borough of Phoenixville. I think the Sons of the American Revolution had something to do with it. I think in the last couple years, in order to keep people from getting run over, they've taken this out of the middle of the street and put it over here, where you don't have to dodge all the traffic. It's not accurate. Actually, Howe sent guys a couple miles up above that. But the point is, if you're at that point, you're beyond George Washington. So just the next time you're driving through Phoenixville, look on your right-hand side if you're going through town, when you get down to that Bridge Street intersection, and there it is. There's the monument. Okay, now you can go back. Sorry, Shannon. Keep going. All right, there we go. we're going to Camp Pottsgrove. So you march Ridge Pike, and when you get up to around Limerick Center, there's a little road coming off to your right. Now this is an old skull map right there. In 1777, the widow Lloyd had a tavern there. And that was the beginning of Swamp Pike. Now they've changed it now, there's a traffic circle and everything, but we all remember when it was something. So they bared off to the right, and he's going to take his army up there and he's going to put them into camp. He's going to put them into camp. Now why is he going up there of all places? Well, I think one of the reasons was that there was a colonel in the army by the name of Philip Antes. Philip Antes lived up here, and he knew the area. It's an area where Washington could take his army, and they would be safe from the British, but they could still keep an eye on if the British tried to move upstream. He could probably come down and intercept them. So there, Widow Lloyd, I'd long gone, but there it is. Then, all right, move on. All right, so here's what you have. You live in New Hanover Township in 1777, and New Hanover Township was much larger than it is today. And keep in mind, there was no Montgomery County in 1777. This was all Philadelphia County. New Hanover Township came all the way down to the river here. There was no Lower Pottsgrove Township. There was no Pottstown. There was Pottsgrove. But even Pottsgrove was in two different townships. So that's how big it was. That's how big the area was. It's about 40-some square miles. It's huge. I don't think there was 800 people lived in that thing. They're all farmers. They're all farmers. There might be an inn somewhere like that. There might be a tanner who's going to take your cow hides and, but he's a farmer. He doesn't make his living. There's a couple of mills, but there's really no towns. There's no villages. The point is, there's not very many people live there. So when 9,000 men and maybe 1,000 horses show up in your neighborhood, what are you gonna do? Because why are they there? As Washington writes, he said, listen, these guys are shot. And said, I have at least 1,000 men that have been marching for days with no shoes. Our uniforms are worn out. We don't have any food. We've got men who are wounded and sick. Outside of that, they're fine. So they go into camps. They set themselves up in a series of camps. And it's going to be basically along Swamp Pike for about 2 miles or 2¼ miles. This very stern-looking gentleman up here is named Benjamin Berthollet or Berthollet. The Berthollets are a French Huguenot, and they lived out there for a long time. He was living in Philadelphia in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So he was obsessed with what's going on here. And at that time, he came up here to talk to some of his relatives who, though most of them weren't alive when this thing happened in 1777, they heard the stories from the people who were alive as to what happened to them. And fortunately for us, he wrote them all down, or he wrote a lot of them. Let me see the next one. Camp Pottsgrove, September 18th to the 26th. Well, he's a little early on the 18th, but that's okay. And it's very good. Okay, let's move on, see what's next. All right, keep moving. Wait, I'm sorry, go back. All right, I'm wearing this poor lady out. Okay, now this is one I doubt very many people actually see, and it's been there since about 1915. This is the Camp Pottsgrove marker. It's on Swamp Pike. What you see there, the road there off to just to the left of that, is actually Faust Road. So you're not far from Fagley'sville at this point. You're a little bit east of Fagley'sville. They put that up. The next slide has the, there you go. General Washington's Continental Army occupied this and adjoining farms September 18th through the 26th. Now, he's a little early on that. The outposts were at Washington Hill and Pottstown, Jackson Hill near Sanatoga, the Swamp Door east of Fegleysville. His headquarters were with Colonel Frederick Antes and Samuel Berthollet at Frederick, PA. And they put this up in 1913, Montgomery County Historical Society. How many people knew that that was there? All right, we got a few. It's like, you think of how many millions of people over the years have driven by that with no idea of what they were seeing. All right, let's see what I have in store. Oh, back. There we go. All right, location of camps. What you're looking at here is a map done in preparation for the 1976 bicentennial by the staff at Pottsgrove Manor. And they did a lot of research on this. A lot of it was based on Berthollet that I just told you. And they're giving you a general idea of where Washington's army was in terms of camps. And as I said before, they ran just from a little bit east of Fegleysville all the way down to about Romick Road. And then they went north besides that. I get this off of here. Come over like that. So you'll probably all have your map there, right? Hopefully. Okay. The camps are numbered 1, 2, 3, 1 through 6. And so I did some writing around. Of course, everything has changed so much since 1777, when hardly anybody lived here, till 2026, when too many people live here. But there's the road network, and those roads still exist. And so let's just look at some of these slides to see what's going on. This map. Now, you might never have seen this map before. Berthollet published that in his book. It's very difficult to read, and notice that there are no road names. So the idea was, if you ain't from here, it doesn't matter. If you don't, it doesn't matter. You should know this stuff. But his is on a much bigger scale. You notice all the way to the right, we're down here to like Royersford or whatever, and it comes all the way up the left to Pottstown here. And yep. And you can see where he indicates the camps with the little triangles. Like, here's a tent. They were here. Yeah. Okay. But go back, please, just poor Shannon. She don't care. One of the things that makes this place so useful to Washington is the idea that they're up high. They're in a position where they can monitor the traffic on our side of the road, or even if there's anybody trying to go up the other side of the road. But at the same time, they're tucked away in a nice little valley. So the British would have a hard time, if they wanted to, of getting at them, because remember, these guys are tired. They're worn out. They've been doing a lot of marching, you know, and they're a disaster. But if you look over here, what he's showing you here are ridges. Like there's what he calls Prospect Hill, which is, it comes down towards Pottstown, and then you've got the ridge up there, the Swamp Creek, and so on and so forth. And so they're sitting down in that valley, and it makes them very well, they're protected. And the road that come up from the swamp, when you get to a point, if you travel Swamp Pike at all, if you're going east on Swamp Pike and you go by that intersection where Pepe's restaurant and bar is now, and you're heading down that way, and you'll go up the hill, and over on your right will be Hetrick's. We'll have, you know, they sell garden supplies and that sort of thing. At that time, this road was much narrower there, and it was called, the Pennsylvania does call it the Schwammer Tor, the door to the swamp. So for the British Army to come up there, they would have had to get by this very narrow bottleneck, which would have been very difficult for them. So that's good. Now let's move on here. Okay, so we want to look at the camps. If you look at your map, I think the one that they call Camp Number 1 is actually very close to Pottstown. All you have to do is drive out Pleasant View Road, you know, and you get to the point where you're coming up on the hill. On your left would have been the old sailor farm, and the road does one of these things and then climbs the ridge. Notice they're on the ridge. That's where they want to be. That's the good place to be. That's the high ground. So what I did when I took this photograph, I was on the Sailor Farm, there's nobody in there anymore, and you're looking uphill, and there's a line of trees there, shows you pretty much where the ridge is. And the sailors farmed this thing in the 19th century, and apparently, on occasion, while plowing, they would turn up some ammunition, maybe a cannonball, some bullets, that sort of thing. So you know they were in that area. One of the families, the fortunate that we have a reminiscence of these people, was the Erb family, E-R-B, not Herb, Erb. Now that was not their house, obviously. It's still there, it's on Bleam Road. If you're driving like west on Bleam Road, past Pleasant View Road, it soon comes up, there's this housing development on your left, and then you'll see this big, beautiful house there with a big fence around it and sign says basketball lessons. Up in the corner, you can't read that cornerstone there, but this thing was built in the early 1870s. Obviously, wasn't there when the colonial army came to visit, but it was on that spot. Different house, same spot. So we know that part of that camp was there. And what do the Erbs have to say about this? Their experience is pretty much like everybody else's. They moved in. They took over the place. You were limited to maybe they'll take over your house. Oh, you can stay in this room, but you've got to stay there. And we take over the house, we take over your barn, and we move in. And when we leave, we take all your stuff. And we take all your cattle. You have any cattle? Oh, we're going to kill them. We're going to butcher them. We're going to eat them. You have any hay or grain, anything? We're taking them too. The horses have to eat, Oh, that blanket? I'll have that blanket too. Well, where are you going to get this stuff when the army leaves? Are you going to go to Walmart? What are you going to do? These people, everything that they have, they've made themselves. And winter is coming on, and there's just no place you're going to go. So that's one spot right there. Let's go to the next one. Oh, no, there we go. This is from, now I'm standing up on the ridge. And as you can see, as you look down, there's, if you had a clear shot there, well, you can see the hills of Chester County way in the background on the other side of the Schuylkill. But what they could see from there, you could look pretty much down into what's now Pottsgrove, but wasn't at the time, and you pretty good view of the road. Okay, next. Okay, we're going to move on to another camp. I think if that was one, this is probably two or three, whatever. But again, if you travel Swamp Pike a lot, and I do since I moved out to Frederick living, this is John Fagley's farm. Now you can tell by the construction of that building, that wasn't here. That's a 19th century building. But that was a site for the camp. And the Fagleys were telling, Fagley descendants were telling Bertolet about their experiences. They said that they remember their grandfather, who was in the Revolution. He was in one of the militia regiments, and he was serving as a teamster. He was using his wagon to transport wounded and sick men up here. And they talked about he had his army greatcoat. Now we're going into the 1800s now, and this guy still had this coat that he wore from 1777. And when it was time to vote, go to election, they would ride up to Stetler's store there on 73. He would put that coat on, button it right up, right up to the neck, and ride his horse up there and vote. And what they talked about, they've been farming this farm for decades, and they keep turning up all kinds of relics, musket balls, bayonets, anything. They talked about at one point, when they were kids, they would go out there and they had a great big bushel basket full of musket balls. Well, they gave them away over the years, so that by the time you get to about 1895 or so, the guy had one left. So he gave it to Bertolet, who took it down to the Montgomery County Historical Society, and it's in their collection. So if you go down there to visit those people, they will show you the musket ball that was dug up there. So that's, all right, let's go on to the next camp. All right. Look at your map. This would be camp number 4, I believe. It should be up higher. That one was way up. That was on what we call now, it's PA 73, which they called it the Great Road. It's a 2-lane highway. But it was a main road at the time. It was put in about 1720. There was no road up there before that. So they were up at this point, and what I'm doing is I'm standing at the intersection with 73 and Colonial Road, and I'm looking south. So this was, obviously I took that this morning, right? How could you tell that? And you can't see much, I mean, it's just, but go on, let me see the next one. Okay, we're now down at New Hanover Square Road. Now, New Hanover Square Road, there's a traffic light there at that intersection, but they were up there, and notice I'm at the intersection there with Swamp Pike and looking south, and notice how the road keeps going up and up and up. So that would lead right into the camps. All right, what's next? This is the one, that's wrong. Now, go back there. I have the captions wrong, but what you're looking at here is you're actually looking at Romick Road and Swamp Pike. And I'm standing on Romick Road and looking back towards the intersection. Notice that big house on the corner. I don't think that was quite old enough to have been there. But, all right, so let's go on to the next one. Now we go on Romick Road. If you take Romick Road and you're going south, and you're going to come out at Bleam Road, if you remember, if you drive this at all, notice how it just goes up, and it comes down a little bit, and then it climbs. You do like one of these things, and then it really starts to climb. And you look off to your left, and I can't remember the name of the family that had that orchard out there for generations. Yes, that's the back of it. That's the back end. So there you are, and the Continental Army would have been up in that area. Again, it's high ground. What's next? Okay, so how do we take care of George? Well, he's the big cheese. Where's he going to stay? Right there. That is the Antes house, A-N-T-E-S, built by Henry Antes in 1736. And his son Philip, who was a colonel in the Philadelphia County Militia at the time, brought Washington up there. George Washington and some of his people stayed in that house. And the reason it looks so good today is we thank the Goshenhoppen historians. They were the ones that took over this place, and they have done just a magnificent job of restoring it and maintaining it. If they hadn't done that, thing would probably be a pile of bricks by now. And they had an open house here about a month ago, and you went over and you know, this is the way it looked when George was there, and there's actually like 3 floors. And Antes was an interesting man. He was, as I said before, took an active part. He's what you would have called a patriot during the Revolution. He was in the Philadelphia County Militia. He was a colonel. He also did some other things. He was helped to underwrite a $200,000 issue of money. Okay, that's fine. The only problem was he was also an officer of the British Crown. He was a justice of the peace up there, and so the British didn't take kindly to that. Say, hey, you're supposed to be on our side. So they put out a bounty on his head, 200 pounds. Now, whatever 200 pounds was worth in those days. So obviously, as the story goes, and this may be a true story, it may not, it sounds good. They came, some loyalists came through the front door of his house one night as he was going out the back door. So they didn't catch him. I don't know if that's true or not. What we do know is that Antes eventually left here. Have you ever heard of a little town called Antes Fort? It's in Lycoming County. It's right across the river from Jersey Shore. Some of his brothers had gone there earlier, but the pressure got so strong that Antes thought, you know what? These guys may get me eventually. So they left. They went all the way up there. He stayed up there. He lived till about like 1801 or something like that. They're not even sure where he's buried, but that's the house. George Washington was in that house, and how do we know that? Let's see right there it is. Washington was a wealthy man, and he served as the general for the Continental Army for all those years, collected no salary. But he did keep They had to pay him his expenses, and they kept records. And there it says, right there, William Ante's bill. That was his mother, his brother. That's where he is. He's at Ante's house. Now, it's very disappointing to some old Pottstonians because for decades, Washington was here. He was in Pottsgrove Township. He stayed at John Potts's house. No, he didn't. Wasn't anywhere near here. That's the closest he was. That's 9 miles away. He did not come down here. And what about Pottstown at this time? I can't figure this one out. The Potts family was very much in favor of the revolution. Why? They made iron, and the British would not allow them to, they would not import any finished iron goods into the British colonies. They did not want to have that competition with their own people. So they weren't very happy about that, and except for one of them, John Potts Jr., who stayed a loyalist, everybody else supported the revolution somehow or other. So we have these curious diary entries. There's a fellow from Lancaster, his name was James McMichael. He was a lieutenant in one of Anthony Wayne's divisions. And he was down there on detached duty. He came through there in July of 1777. And he said, I came into Pottstown, and he said, the people here are Tories. And he said, I remonstrated against them. He should have kept his mouth shut, but he didn't. And he said, I got really nervous, so I left town, crossed the river, and went over on the Chester County side. So I don't know why they're supposed to be Tories. One of Washington's procurement officers showed up here in Pottstown to check out the stores that they had in September 23rd. And on the 22nd, Samuel Chase was the man's name, and he wrote from Pottsgrove to Washington concerning supplies stored there. And he wrote, in this place, the inhabitants are almost all Tories. So poor Pottstown, or Pottsgrove as it was at the time, I don't know where they got this idea. Where they got, the only thing I can think of is when some of these Quakers came through town that had been exiled in early September. The lower Potts families, like the Rudders and the Pottses, put them up for a night, but I have no idea. Anyway, they're Tories. Not, but anyway, it's just a little thing pass on. Let's see what's next. Oh, by the way, now, the father who built this place is buried down here, but it's the Shalcott burial ground now. Unfortunately, his stone's gone. They had a really nice memorial. It disappeared. Keep going. Okay, now I was talking to a gentleman here who is a Bertolet or Bertolet descendant, and he's talking about, this is Samuel. This is Samuel's house. It's only about 300 yards north of the Ante's house on the same side of the road. Some of George Washington's staff stayed in that house also during this encampment. When you drive by there today, I don't think anybody lives there. The house still stands, but it's all overgrown and you can hardly see it from the road. I don't know when I took this photo, but you can see it's clear now. But there it is. So you're driving up, and all this stuff is going on. All right, go ahead. And that's where he's buried. There's a Mennonite, they had a Mennonite meeting house up there, and the meeting house is not there anymore. Well, the house is there, or the meeting house is there, but you know, it's not used. But there's the stone. That's his stone. And these guys, these stones are all in German. Somebody at some point got one of these grave markers from down at Montgomery County and put it up, and it obscures, there's a lot of this stuff you can't read. But it says, here ruit de Gebina of the Samuel Bertolet. It tells you when he was born, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Unfortunately, there's a lot of it you can't read because of that marker. And I thought, maybe I'll just see if I can pull the marker out. I'll put it back after I'm done. Whoever put that thing in there, it's got to be 6 foot deep. I was like, can't come out. So that's that. That's Samuel, but there's his stone. It's still there. Okay, let's go on. Okay, now, we get down to the nitty-gritty here. And we have a lot of these, as I said, thanks to Bertolet. Bertolet went around, and the people that he talked to basically told him the same story that I just told you about the Erb family. They talked about the soldiers came in, they were very nice to them, but they just took over the place. You stay in that room. That's your room. And so they used the barn, you know, and they used everything. And of course they're starving. So they're taking the cattle and they're butchering them. And what we're looking at here is a creek, obviously, duh. And we're looking north. That's Swamp Pike. You can see it off in the distance there. And it's not much of a creek now. Now keep in mind, in 1777, with nobody living out, or very few people living out here, the water tables were much higher. So what's a little thread of a stream in 2026, because there's tens of thousands of houses out here, was more substantial in those days. So the butchers set up shop in the meadow, and they talked about at that time there was a huge, what they called an old oak tree. I don't know what kind it was, but in 1777 it was huge. So you know it'd been there for a couple hundred years. And what they did was they killed the cattle and they hung them up from the branches and they butchered them. And then, so you're stuck with all the guts and everything else. What do you do with it? Throw it in the creek. That's what they did. Now, if anybody knows Pennsylvania Dutch, what does speck mean in Pennsylvania Dutch?
Pork or pig?
Speck means fat. My mother, I was a skinny little thing when I was a kid. And my grandmother would tell me to eat this, it'll put speck on your bones. Put some fat, put some meat there. So that was what they did. They threw it in the creek. And I thought, and here's where you can never learn enough about this stuff. I thought, okay, this was something that they just came up with, that the Army did. No. People were doing that for years before. They were butchering down in that meadow and throwing the stuff in the creek. And they talked about how the boys would dig out these intestines and run around with them and tie them on the tails of dogs and this sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun. But anyway, that is Speck Creek. So whenever you pass over that thing, that's it. If you were there in September of 1777, you would have seen these guys down in the meadow there. There'd have been dead cows, dead pigs, and also baking ovens. Right? Baking ovens. One of Auntie's brothers went out and bought a big load of bricks. They brought it back there. They put up these ovens, and they were baking bread. And of course, where do you get the grain to bake the bread? From all the people around. Say, oh yeah, I'll have that. So Washington's boys are getting fed, but it's tough. Okay, let's go on here. There it is. This is the Andrea Schmidt house. You can read as well as I can. This guy owned, now people owned a lot of acres in those days, but he beat everybody. He owned 450 acres. 450. That house still stands. Where is it? Again, if you're familiar with Swamp Pike, depending on which direction you're going, if you're coming from Boyertown on Swamp Pike and you start down the hill towards the traffic light at Limerick Center Road, you'll see that house on your right. Obviously, if you're coming the other way, it'll be on your left. That house was there in 1777. And Schmidt was wealthy. It was a big house. And so what he did was the front rooms of the house doubled as a country inn and tavern. So they show up, the colonial doctors, the Army doctors show up. And of course, if it's a hotel and it's got this big, great room in there, one thing they have is a great big table. The surgeons were using that as an operating table. And surgery in those days was pretty primitive. It consisted mostly of amputating a leg or an arm or something like that. So there they are. And that table was in existence for years and years and years. These poor guys are stretched out on this table, and somebody's like, they're sawing off their arm, sawing off their leg, toss it out the window. Eventually, these things got buried, okay. About 20 years ago, I wrote a story about this that we published in the Mercury, and I was out there driving around and doing research, And on impulse, I pulled into the driveway and knocked on the door, and the lady of the house answered the door, you know, and I told her who I was and what I was doing. And so we were chatting there. And I just couldn't resist it. I said, "Do you see or see anything strange here?" She goes, "Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I do." They hear noises, they see things. What would you expect? I mean, if you're going to go to a place that's haunted, it's great, you know, one of those things. I've never seen a ghost. I don't want to see a ghost, but I've done enough talking to people around here who've seen them. I believe they exist. But yeah, they were turning up, when they were plowing, it was nothing to turn up an arm or a leg or something like that. So that was where they did a lot of their medical stuff. That's the western side of the house. There you go. It's a beautiful place. Okay, we've got the churches here, and guess what they're going to be used for? Hospitals, right, right. We've got two. This is the Faulkner Swamp United Church of Christ. It was reformed in those days. The congregation was formed in 1725. I should have done my research. I don't think, yeah, I think that building was there in 1777. So it got turned into a hospital where the sick and the wounded were put in there. The women of the neighborhood came in to nurse these guys. Now keep in mind, there's no light in there. If the sun's out, it's not too bad, but if it's a cloudy day, it's not so hot. So these guys are there. And one more, please. There it is. That's New Hanover Lutheran. This is the oldest Lutheran congregation in continuous existence in the United States. Founded around 1700 by Daniel Faulkner, Faulkner Swamp. All right. The building you're looking at here, 1768. So you know they were using that building. There it was. And it's the same thing. Okay. What happened? Needless to say, there are a lot of men buried out there. They don't know where they're buried. They're unidentified. And this is a memorial to unknown Revolutionary War soldiers buried in New Hanover Lutheran. So, and these were guys that probably died while they were up here. Okay, what do we got next? Oh yeah, this is great. The thing about the Pennsylvania Germans are that they were very thorough about their tombstones, as you can tell by looking at this thing. And so they did these stones, and they're almost like a biography. And it's all in German. It's all in German. But that stone has survived, that's been in the ground for about 200 years. Survived acid rain, winters, summers, sleet, freezing rain, whatever. And of course, there's the monument. And this is Johannes Fegeli. That's the way they spelled it in those days, with a V. Now, let's go to the next. This is a translation of what it is. Here ruet, here rise, here rests Johannes Fegeli. He was born the 6th of January, 1752. He married Anna Maria Linsenbigler the 2nd of December, 1777. They were married 56 years, 11 months, and 28 days. And he died on the 30th of November, 1834, age 82 years, 10 months, and 20 days. Now, some of them are even more elaborate. They will tell you, like, he had so many children. Just say the guy had 10 children, and they'll say 6 girls and 4 boys, or whatever it was. And at the bottom, and I can't make this out on the stone, is that the text from the Bible that the minister used to preach his funeral sermon, that was listed down there too. Amazing, absolutely amazing. And it was all done by hand. They're not saying, you know, they'll have some kind of, these guys are going, and there it is. Absolutely amazing stuff. Now, it's starting this weathering, it's getting weathered, you know, but that long is just fantastic. So let's move on, because we're going to leave here. By September the 26th, Washington is going to move on. What does he have in mind here? Now remember, he went the wrong way. If he wanted to keep them from capturing Philadelphia, he went the wrong direction. But I guess in his mind, he thought, His right flank and Reading were much more important than Philly, and of course he was justified in doing that. But what happened to the English army? The night of the 23rd, they start crossing the Schuylkill River. The moon's shining, you know, it's about 10, 11 o'clock at night, and they've got thousands and thousands of soldiers to bring over this river. They've got wagons. They've got to bring their wagons, all their supply stuff over the river. It takes them almost a full day to get over there. So now what has Hal got? He's got what he wants. He's on the same side of the river as Philadelphia, and it didn't cost him a man. He didn't have to fight Washington to get across there. There he is. So what's next? They're going to move on, and they're going to move on. They're going to go up and, Ridge Pike that grows into Norristown. They're going to move along that area, and they're going to work their way down to Germantown, where they're going to set up a big camp. And then on the morning of the 26th of September, he's going to detach maybe 4,000 or 5,000 guys, and they're going to march into Philadelphia and occupy Philly. So Hal got what he wanted, at least that's part of what he wanted. He never did get a chance to have that showdown fight with Washington's army where he could exterminate them. So what is Washington doing in the meantime? Well, notice how he keeps moving on down the road. His next stop, goodbye Camp Pottsgrove, and we're going to move and we're going to march down on the Skipack Road, Route 73, to Pennypacker Mills. I think we all know where Pennypacker Mills is. All right, that's going to be Washington's headquarters. There's the house. Now that's the greatly enlarged version. When they interpret this down here, they interpret it as the mansion of the former governor of Pennsylvania, Samuel W. Pennypacker, and it's greatly enlarged. But if you look to your right, that part on the right was where George, that was standing in 1777, and George would have been there, and his men would have been all over the place. And they're here to make trouble. Well, not trouble, they don't mean to make trouble, but they need stuff. So they're going to take it. They're going to take it. From there, we move on down. He'll march on down to Skipack, down to the village. And from there, they move a little bit further down to a place that I always, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, they're moving down. And from there, on October 4th, he will go into Germantown and attack the British army. He can fool, the British had no idea he was coming. They didn't have their full army there. Remember, thousands of troops are already in Philadelphia. There are more have been sent down towards Delaware. And so the Americans show up there, come out of the fog. They come roaring down the pike there, and they had the British on the ropes. If they hadn't been diverted by trying to capture one house, they would have won that battle. But eventually they lose the battle. They do lose the battle, and everybody has to retreat. Where do they go? They go all the way back to Schwenksville, down to this camp. So guess what? They get a double dose. They got them going, and they get them coming. So it's been tough for these people. And there you go. Here it is, Samuel Pennypacker in his family Bible, and that was his house we looked at there. He's a very successful businessman. He was so disgusted with this thing that he wrote in the family Bible, on the 26th of September, an army of 30,000, well, it wasn't 30,000, but it just seemed that way. What do these guys know, you know? Encamped in Skipack Township. They burned all the fences. They carried away the fodder, hay, oats, and wheat, and took their departure on the 8th of October, 1777. So he's actually counting two visits here. The first one when he came in, next one when they moved down to Methacton, went on, they came back. So he got them going, coming back. And he's probably very happy to see them all go. So what happens from this point? Well, there's not going to be any more big battles between Washington and Howe. They're maneuvering around. Howe tries to sucker him into attacking him, but Washington's not falling for it. And eventually they're going to wind up in winter camp at Valley Forge. On the 18th of December, they march in there. So how does this thing all end? I plug my dates here. But what happens is that there's kind of a metamorphosis of Washington's army. It gets trained. These guys are more thoroughly drilled, so on and so forth. In the meantime, things have taken a nasty turn for the British. You know, Benjamin Franklin was trying his best. He was in Paris trying to get the French to openly declare war on England. They were helping us out, kind of under the, you know, they sending us money, they were sending us ammunition and that sort of thing. But they were afraid they were backing a losing horse. They didn't know if the colonies could actually resist Britain and could win their independence. And then, in the beginning of October of 1777, if you think back to when I first started about this thing, remember I told you there was a British army under Johnny Burgoyne coming down from Canada. Burgoyne gets caught and he has to surrender the entire army. 7,000 troops, 7,000 British troops have to surrender. Well, that gets the French's attention. Say, hey, these guys might be okay. So at that point, soon after that, France becomes involved in the war. Not just helping people out, but we're going to help you out. And of course, everybody hates Britain anyway. So they built their navy up. They're going to attack the British, not just in North America, they're going to attack their islands and everything that they have in the Caribbean. They're going to be sailing around. It comes really bad, and eventually even Spain will come in. So without that, without the French, we don't win. And what really got it for us was actually not down here at Valley Forge, but up there in New York. So at any rate, the British are going to leave town. They said, you know what, we got to get out of here. We're in Philadelphia, it's not doing us any good. And we're going to have to go back to New York. And that's what they do. They pull out in 1778, I believe the beginning of June. And there are so many loyalists that they have to take back with them that all their ships are filled up. So Sir Henry Clinton, who is now in charge of the army, Hal's gone home, he's had enough of this, marches them back. Washington chases them. And they're going to fight a battle towards the end of the month. And when that battle is over, that, my friends, is the end of the fighting in the Northeast for the rest of the war. That's it. They go back there, Washington goes into New Jersey, and you're no major battles being fought. But for a while, our area right here was one of the main focal points, all this action going on. So what is Camp Pottsgrove all about? I think the thing that it just shows what can happen to innocent people when they get in the way here. And these guys were on our side. They were on our side. And they cleaned us out. They cleaned us out. So it's kind of an interesting thing, and they were here, but you get an idea of what it must have been like to have to deal with this. There's one more quote I could find that's really very good. I probably won't be able to find it now. Nah, not going to work. Anyway,
We believe you.
well, I'm going to give you an idea. I'll just paraphrase this thing. When they got to Camp Pottsgrove, they're there 23rd to the 26th, then they move on down, but they can't get enough stuff out of these people. They need more. So they have their wagons and their foraging, and they go all the way out to where the twin churches are there at Spangsville. That's like 18 miles away. And there was a guy out there by the name of Lesher. And Lesher was a big shot, and he owned a forge. And he complained about this. He said, what am I supposed to do here? They said, these people show up and they took all my cattle, they took all my hogs, I have nothing to feed my workers with, I've got to send them home. And he said, it's not just me, it's everybody in this whole area. So they did a very thorough job. It was like the locusts showed up, or the ants came to your picnic and carried off your pumpkin pie. So yeah, so it's a great story, but I should never get tired of telling this. Thank you all for coming out on a miserable evening like this. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Done.
guess it's on.
Doesn't matter, just talk loud.
It's always good to have a partner to remind you of things. I failed to mention that Mike is a past president of our society, but I've been told. When you're told, you have to tell it.
Yeah.
So I thank everybody for coming out, and we got plenty of goodies up there for everybody, so enjoy yourself, communicate with each other, and we'll see you next time in March.